Hello everyone and welcome to a new Mega Drive Genesis Beginners Game Dev tutorial. In the last tutorial we focused on the D-pad controls and we got Axel here moving about very nicely, and we also got the animation integrated within the control code, and we also learnt about if statements and how they are used. So we really learnt a lot last lesson, and in this lesson I said we'll learn how to do button controls, but when I did that divide between D-pad controls and button controls, that's not entirely accurate, as you'll see in this lesson here. A more accurate way of saying it would be that last time we learnt controls which were ongoing as more of a process. So if you held down part of the D-pad, then the controls will continue to be activated, whereas today we're going to focus on controls which are more of a one-off event. So you push them once, and even if you hold them down, they only happen once. To make them happen a second time, you have to let go and then push the button or even the D-pad again. So in order to demonstrate that, let's take a look at some Mega Drive games and see that whole concept in action. This is a game I'm sure everyone watching here is familiar with, a classic late era Mega Drive game. So, and it's a good demonstration of what we're going to demonstrate today and what we're going to learn today. So if I press the attack button and hold the attack button, it only attacks once, the main character attacks once, and if I want to attack again, then I have to let go and press it again. And the same with the jumping too. I can only jump once, so I know if I want to jump again, I have to let go of the jump button and push again. But the D-pad controls are different, because if I don't need to keep pushing, say, the right to make him go right. All I need to do is hold the D-pad and he'll continue to go right or continue to go left and so on. So these are two different types of controls, and we learnt the first one in the previous lesson, and in this lesson we're going to dig into the second kind and also compare the two. Before we get stuck into that, I just want to talk a bit about using the Kega Fusion emulator as I did last time. So I haven't got integrated with the Visual Studio Code. Actually, all I've got is I've got it open behind, and I just alt tab into it whenever I need it, and I just save and compile as usual, and I just simply, if you do Control G, then it will make it search for the file, and you always keep in mind the last file. So actually you can just save, compile, do alt tab to get Kega Fusion back on the screen, then do Control G and then hit return or enter, and then it will just go straight into your ROM again. So it saves the space of your ROM. So I don't know how to get it integrated like we did with the Gens emulator. I'm sure it's possible, it just needs a bit more know-how than I have. So that's how I do it. So sorry for any confusion before. Some people thought I got it integrated, but that's not the case. We are going to pick up exactly where we left off in the last lesson on the D-pad controls, and just like last time we're going to create our own function which we're going to put the new control code into. And just like the previous function we created, first we're going to start off by writing static, then a space, then void, and then we're going to write the name of the function, and in this case we're going to call it joy event. And then we're going to open the brackets, and this time we do need to put some information in here. We're going to put in U16 joy, U16 changed, and then finally U16 state. Now you can see here I made a bit of a mess of this, and I'm going to go back and correct it in a second, because obviously I've got a couple of typos in there. It'll take me just a minute to realize, but don't think too much about what this U16 joy and changed and state are. This particular function is a bit different from other functions we're going to create, in that it's kind of integrated into SGDK, so it acts a bit differently, a bit unusual compared to other functions we're going to be creating into the future. So try not to overthink it too much. So like last time we had to create this U16 value read joypad variable, but this time when it comes to these three here, we don't have to create any variables ourselves for this. It's just kind of integrated within SGDK already, so try not to overthink it too much. In order to really demonstrate the differences between the function we're creating here, where it's kind of a single event control code, and the function we created in the previous lesson, where it's this kind of continuous checking on what buttons or what D-pad places are being held, I think it'd be a good idea just to pretty much duplicate the code we wrote last time, and we're going to see what happens when we try to do the D-pad controls within our joy event function instead of in our previous function. So let's go ahead and do that. So just like last time, we're going to need an if statement. Now it's going to look a bit different. It's still going to use the single AND here because we're still dealing with the controls. So we're going to go if it's been changed, there's been a change, and i.e. the button's been pressed, and if there's a state, so don't overthink it too much, and button, and again like last time we're going to do button right. So in other words, if the right part of the D-pad is being held, and again we're going to open the curly brackets. And just like with last time, within the curly brackets is going to be the code if that if statement is satisfied. So if it's true, so if the right D-pad is being held, then we're going to do this code. So just like last time, we're going to add 1 to the player X coordinate, so he's going to move to the right, and we can set the animation to, and we can also flip the sprite also. So if we just do that, and now we probably easiest thing, and rather than doing, we're going to do like an else if, but we can probably just copy the whole thing. It'd probably be quicker that way, and if we copy and paste and then just make some alterations. So we change this to an else if, because remember it's either going to be right or left, not both at the same time. So we can use an if and else if statement here. Change it to button left, change it to so it takes away 1 from the X coordinates, because that will make it go to the left, and then set the flip a bit different too, because it's going to flip, so set that to false instead. And now we can do the same with up and down too. Remember that the Y coordinate starts from 0 at the top of the screen, so if we want the character to go up, we're going to have to be -1 rather than +1. It seems a bit counterintuitive, but I think you're used to it now already. And we can get rid of the set horizontal flip, because obviously it doesn't flip horizontally when you move up and down, and we just change the rest, button down and so on. And to move down the screen, of course, we're going to add 1 to the Y coordinates, and again get rid of the horizontal flip. Since both sets of code are going to run at the same time, we don't want any conflict between them. I'm going to highlight all this previous code in our handleInput function that we did in the previous lesson. I'm just going to comment it out, so hopefully then we can see how the new function is working without any interference from the new one. Now I'm going to leave the SPR set position, because obviously we're going to need that in order to change the position of the sprite on the screen, so that needs to be left. And of course that function's still within the while loop, so it's still going to work, so we're going to leave that as it is, the rest of it. Now normally when creating a function, we need to call it within the while loop, within the game loop, in order to get it to function. But this one, as I said, is a bit unusual. This one is kind of integrating SGDK, so it works in an unusual way. So we're actually going to put this in main. We're going to write this extra line, this joy set eventHandler, and we're going to open the brackets, and we're going to put a joy event in there, and then of course a semicolon. So we don't actually need to add anything into the while loop for this one. So said, don't overthink it too much. With other functions we create, we're going to definitely need to put that into the while loop, but this one acts a bit differently. In fact, in order to simplify things a bit further, I'm going to delete all the animation code from this from our function too, because I want everyone to focus on the controls rather than animation. So let's get rid of the animation, then save and compile, and let's see what the result is like. Just as with last lesson, I'm using Kega Fusion here. So again, I'm going to, after compiling and saving compiling, I'm going to Alt Tab and then Control G, and then we have our Kega Fusion up. Now here I press right once, and I'm holding the right D-pad, but it moves once and then never again. So just like in when we talked about Castlevania before, you need to let go and then tap it again in order to make it activate again. It's not a continuous activation. So I'm trying to move like right here. So right here I'm pressing the D-pad very quickly, right or up or diagonally, and then it can move a bit faster, because you have to let go and press again before it activates again. So obviously this isn't very convenient for most D-pad controls in 90% of circumstances. So that's why I called the previous lesson D-pad controls, and why I'm calling this lesson button controls, because normally you use this function for the buttons for attacking and jumping and so on, and the previous function we did in the previous lesson for the D-pad. Now there are circumstances where we do use this function for the D-pad controls, and I wonder if you can guess what that is. Now if you happen to guess menu screens and option screens, then congratulations. Now I'm sure many of you recognize this options menu from which game is from, and if for this one, imagine if you use the if you put the code for the D-pad for this particular part of the controls in the function we did in the previous lesson. Now, remember it updates once every 60th of a second, so unless you're very quick in letting go of the D-pad, the up or down when you're pressing it, it's probably going to skip down 2 or 3 options before you even let go, which would be very annoying. And I actually did this when I first started learning SGDK. I didn't really understand the difference, so I tried to do an options menu and it just skipped down. It moved too fast, the cursor moved too fast, and it's hard to select the option you want to. So in this example, in the Streets of Rage 3 options menu, if you press down or up and you hold it, it only moves once, just as when you jump or attack in the Castlevania game, because I think that's probably a better design choice, because then you don't have to skip between many different options accidentally. It's kind of a better way to do it. But that's one of the few examples where we're going to use the D-pad controls in the new function we created today, when we do more of the event rather than the continuous checking of the controls. Just as there are certain circumstances where we want to put the D-pad controls within our new function we're creating today, there are some circumstances where you want to create your button controls, for example attack controls, in the function we created last time for the handle input function. So this is an example here, Mystic Defender. Now we can do the normal attack here, but we can also do this holding attack, where we hold the attack button for a certain time and then let go. Now, in order to continuously check this, know how long you're holding it for, obviously we want it to be continuously check this control. So in this particular circumstance, I would normally recommend that you do that attack function, that attack code within the handle input function that we created in a previous lesson, rather than in the new function we're creating today. So as you can see, it's not a simple divide between D-pad controls and button controls, but normally in the handle input function, 90% of the time that's where we're going to put the D-pad controls, and 90% of the time we're going to put the buttons into the other functions. So it's up to your own decisions and your own game design, your own creativity, on depending on how you want to do this. So it's entirely up to you. So this is just some advice. Okay, now back to our program. Now, since we're not creating an options menu, I don't think we need all this D-pad controls within our new Joy event function. So let's comment that all out. And let's go and reinstate all the D-pad controls within our handle input function instead. So that's going to work. So be careful here, be more careful than I am. So the mouse moves pretty fast sometimes. So if we uncomment that out, and now all that code is reinstated, the D-pad controls, and if we save and compile, and then again Alt Tab to bring up Kega Fusion, then Control G, then return, and we have it up again. So there's a slight problem. I've made a mistake here. I've not been careful enough in uncommenting out stuff. I'm not sure if you can guess what it is. I'll tell you in a second. Okay, so the issue is line 39, we've got this player plus equals 1. So we're adding 1 to the Y position each time, even if no button is pushed. This must be some legacy code we got left over from the previous lesson that we commented out, and I wasn't very careful, and I actually uncommented it out. So there's probably a lesson there that you should probably, any code you're definitely not going to want, you should probably just delete it rather than commented it out, and only comment code stuff out that you think you might want to put back in at a later date. So now that's deleted and it should be fine. What we're going to do now is I'm going to add some attacking code to our handle input function. So I said before that we don't normally do it this way, but just to demonstrate how it will turn out, let's do if value and button B. So if button B is being held down, and then we set the animation to our ground upper animation to simulate as if the player is going to be attacking. So again, we need 2 pieces of information. We need the sprite and also the animation, and add the semicolon, don't forget that. We're also going to want to do one more thing before we save and compile. Remember, we got this final if statement which sets the animation back to idle if none of the buttons are being pressed. Now, we've already added all the different D-pad controls, but we want to add one more condition to this. We want to set the animation to idle if the the attack button isn't being pressed as well. So again, we're using two ands because we're making logical comparison between two different states, or in this case, I think we've got 5 different states now. So remember, the exclamation mark means not. So if button B is not being held down, what's going to happen is going to return to idle again. So let's test it out. So we're walking around fine. Now if we press the attack button, you can see it only the attack only happens so as long as you're holding the B button down. And if we try and move at the same time, we have this weird effect too. Now if I hold down the B button constantly, then it's going to attack constantly, but that's not how it worked in the Castlevania game, the Bloodlines game we saw earlier, and it's not how it works in most games. So this result isn't really what we want for most games. So that's why we don't really use this handle input function for the attack, and I want to show you a different way, a better way to do it now. Right now I'm just pressing Ctrl Z repeatedly just to undo all the code we wrote before, so get rid of that the attack code from our handle input function. If I save and compile, then we'll be back to where we were just a moment ago, and said we don't need all this D-pad stuff, so I'm going to delete most of it, but I'm going to keep a little bit just as a sample that we can change. So I want to change that to button B. So, and now I'm going to uncomment it out. So previously we added to the X coordinates when we press the right button, but we don't want that right now. And I accidentally deleted one of the curly brackets there, so be careful when you're deleting stuff and commenting stuff out, because you could accidentally delete the curly brackets around the if statement here. So you see it's red at the moment, just to the right, and if I do the closing curly brackets, it's back to yellow again. So it's a good little warning it gives you there. So we're going to want to get rid of this player X, and we're going to want to play the animation instead, the animation for the attack, just like we did last time. Now off screen during an edit, at line 55, I commented out the joy of set event handler for some reason, so I'm just going to uncomment out now so it is active. And if I save and then compile, now we can see the D-pad controls are working as normal, but if I try and press B, the attack button, you can see there's a slight kind of a sluggishness when you press the B button. It interrupts his animation a bit, but it doesn't actually attack. So what's happening here is only switching to the attack animation for a single frame, and then it immediately switches back to the previous code for the idle animation. So what we need to do is we need to give the attack a bit of time to play out. Now in order to do that, we're going to need to give a timer. So if I just comment out the code that returns it back to idle animation, you see if I press B here, it does actually go to the attack animation. If I press right, it goes to the right walking animation, left to the left walking animation, and I can go up and down. If I press B again, it'll go to the attack animation because we've disabled the idle animation code. So it's working, the B button's working, but we just need to set some kind of a timer to give the attack animation some space to play out before we go back to the idle animation. That's what we're going to do now. The first thing we need to do is to reinstate the idle animation code, so we just uncomment that out. The next step will be to move to the very top of the file and create 2 variables. Now, the first variable is going to be a timer that's going to keep track of how long our attack animation has been playing out for. You can call it what you like. I'm going to call mine attack_timer, make it equal to 0 and a semicolon. The next thing we're going to have to do is work out how long we want the attack animation to play out for. Now we're going to count here, so we've got 7 frames of the attack animation, and each frame it takes 8 frames to change. So 8/60ths of a second we get a single change. So for every 8 frames it changes once, and there's 7, so 7 times 8 equals 56. So that's how long our attack animation is going to play for. So if we go back to the main.c file and we change that, we create a new variable. We're going to call this, we're going to make an integer as well, and I'm going to call it attack_duration and make it equal to 56. If you'll recall earlier in the lesson when I spoke about Castlevania Bloodlines, when you were walking but then press the attack button, the character will pause for a second while they carried out the attack animation and then carry on afterwards, even if you held down the left or right the D-pad control. So I want to do the same effect here. That's what we're going to do first of all. We want to make it so that the D-pad controls don't work while you're attacking. In order to do this, we're first going to go to where our attack code is. So it's in our joy event function, and we set the animation to anim upper as usual, and we're going to add this add 1 to the attack timer. So instead of 0, when you press the B button, it's going to add 1, and the attack timer is going to become 1 instead of 0. Next up is to create a way to make the handleInput function suspend while we're attacking. So we're going to use an if function for this. So we're going to say if the attack timer is equal to 0, then the handleInput function will work. But if it's any number other than 0, if it's not 0, if it's 1 after the B button has been pressed, then it won't work anymore. Now you can see here I've done the if statement on a single line without any curly brackets. Now this is a short way of writing it when you know you only have one line of code which activates if the if condition is satisfied. So we can actually write it this way too, that I'm writing it underneath it here at the bottom. So these two are both the same. If you're going to do more than one line of code, then use the second one. But if you know you're only going to need one line of code, as in this instance, then you don't need the curly brackets. You can just put the executable code right after the condition like I have here. So just to recap, at the very top here we've got the attack timer equals 0 when the program starts, but as soon as you press the B button for the first time, it's going to add 1 to it. Now that's going to make the attack timer not equal to 0, so the handleInput won't activate, it won't work because due to our if statement here. And just before we save and compile and see what the effect is, you might have noticed that when I've asked is the attack timer equal to 0, I've used 2 equals, because that's when we're doing a logical comparison, we use 2 equal signs, but when we're assigning a value to a variable, we use just 1. So keep this in mind, it's an easy mistake to make. So when we're making a logical comparison, we have to say is the attack timer equal to 0, we use 2 equal signs, whereas if we want it to change it to something, we want to say okay, make this variable equal to this, then we just use a single equal sign. So remember, the handleInput function contains all the D-pad instructions and the idle animation code as well. So as soon as we press the B button for the first time, it's going to add 1 to the attack timer. The attack timer will no longer equal to 0, so the handleInput function will not work, it will stop working. So now let's finally save and compile and see if that works. Okay, so first of all, the idle animation is working fine. If I walk around as normally, the D-pad function is working fine. Now if I press B for the first time, so now the animation is playing out as much as it wants, and if I try and press left, right, up or down, it's not working because the attack timer doesn't equal 0, so the handleInput won't be activated. So what we need to do now is to try and get a way to have the attack play out, but only for a certain period of time, and then once that time's 0, so we want to reset the attack timer back to 0 so that the handleInput can work again. In order to do this, we're going to have to add an else if to our if statement. So we're going to say we're going to have to keep adding to the timer until it reaches our attack duration. Remember, we set a variable before where we said this is how long the animation should play out. So we do else if, and we're going to meet a new symbol we haven't seen before. We're going to say if the attack timer is greater than 0, but, and in this case, the attack timer is less than the attack duration, then we want it to add 1 to the attack timer. I think most of you would have seen the greater than and less than symbol before, so hopefully it won't be too alien to you. Now in English, if we're saying it, we would say if the attack time is greater than 0 but less than the attack duration, then do this. But we have to be a bit more verbose when writing the code. So we have to say if the attack timer is greater than 0 and if the attack timer is less than the attack duration, then please add 1 to the attack timer. And again, since we're going to have one line of code, we don't need the curly brackets. So remember at the beginning when it adds this a single one here, we don't want to keep adding it if you keep pressing the B button. We want you to be able to press the B button once and that's enough. So we want to add another condition to this, whereas it only adds 1 and gets the animation started if the attack timer equals 0. So again, we're going to use the double AND to connect these, and we say if the buttons presses B and if the attack timer is equal to 0, then please add 1 to the attack timer to get the process started and set the animation to anim upper. And we only need to do that once. We don't need to keep killing the computer to do that. So we're saving some CPU cycles here. So once it goes above 1, then this else if statement is going to take over, and that's the one that's going to keep adding to the attack timer again and again. Finally, to finish this off, we're going to need to make it so that if the attack timer, when it eventually does equal the attack duration, that it's going to reset the attack timer back to 0 again. And then after that, you can either press the attack button again, or you're free to use all the D-pad controls, because if attack timer equals 0, then handle input will work. So again, we're going to use the double equal sign to do a logical comparison. If attack timer is equal to attack duration, then do this. To do this in this case is to set the attack timer to 0. And pay attention here, remember we're assigning a value to a variable, so we use just one single equal sign in that case rather than 2. So once the attack timer equals 0 again, all this D-pad controls, they can go ahead and you can use them as normal unless you press the B button again, in which case the whole attack process will get started. So remember, attack timer equals 0, then we got attack duration, which is how long we want it to last for, and then these 3 lines of code are what handle that. I hope that's all clear. Feel free to ask me some questions in the comments if there's something you're not clear about. Once we start doing this kind of stuff, there's often more than one way to do something. The coding can become very creative. I've tried to do a very simple example here, but even simple examples can get quite complex quite quickly. So I hope everyone understands the process and the logic behind it. And of course, the proof is in the pudding, so we're going to have to save and compile, and let's see if the code we wrote actually works. So here we have it. Axel, we can move him up, down, left, right, so the D-pad controls are working fine. If I press the B button once, the attack animation plays out and then it stops, and then we're back to be able to use the D-pad controls, or else press the attack button again. And as you can see, it also, if I hold the right or left as I'm pushing attack, it also pauses that, so it will stop him and then it will continue to move left or right afterwards. So the code is working fine, just as we intended. It's always a little bit boring when your code works first time, so let's mess things up a bit. Let's change the attack duration to 60, so that should mean that the attack duration is a bit too long, so the animation should start to repeat. So if we save and compile, let's see what that looks like. So again, in Kega Fusion, open it. If we press B, you can see the attack duration is a little bit long here. It kind of overshoots, so it's too long, so the animation starts to repeat itself, so you have to be careful with that. But as we saw before, it's pretty easy to calculate how long you have to make the animation duration for. It's pretty easy to do, so you shouldn't have to do any trial and error. You can just work it out yourself. And if we just set the attack function back to the attack duration back to 56, then we're back to normal, back to as it should be. So I think it's looking pretty good now. Before I finish the lesson, let me give you one little more bonus. So we've had if and if else, but there's actually a third one we can do. We can just do the else. So else means that if any of the above are not true, then just do this automatically. Now the advantage of this is we can get rid of the bracket, so we can say if all the above pieces of code are untrue, then please just do this. So you have to be very careful of this because it's very powerful, and it can be a little bit too powerful. As they say, with great power comes with great responsibility. So in this case, we've got pretty simple code, so it's easy to predict what the effect will be, and we can use this if statement, so it's fine. So it says if the attack time doesn't equal 0, and if it doesn't, if it's not greater than 0 and less than the attack duration, then please do this, which will be to put the attack timer back to 0. So if we compile and save, we can see that in this case using else is very appropriate. It means we don't have to write so much code. It looks a bit neater, but be careful with else. You can have some unintended consequences, so be careful. But it's something I wanted to show you because you're probably going to see it as you look at other people's code. Actually, before we go, let me give you a bonus. So instead of having this code into our while loop like this, we can actually create a very simple function, and we can just put that function into we can call that function in the while loop instead. So if we do static void again, for example, we can call it whatever you like. We can call it I'm going to call it here the attack function. It's not very creative, but it explains what it does. We don't need anything within the brackets. Again, we need the curly brackets, and we can simply paste that code into there. And all we need to do now is just call the attack function within our while loop. So remember, the other function, the SCDK function we created today, was a bit unusual in that we didn't have to put it into a while loop, but this being an ordinary function, we do need to put it. So if we save and compile and then open up in Kega Fusion, you see it's working fine, but it makes our while loop look a bit neater. You don't want all this kind of stray code in there. Okay, that really is it for today. So we're at half hour now, so I think this is the longest lesson we've ever done. I wanted to keep these bite-sized, but some things just require more explanation. I want to show you the kind of common errors, and I want to make sure you understand so you can write your own code instead of having to rely on the code I write and just copy it out, so that you understand what's being written and why it's being written the way it is. And so hopefully you can be creative yourself and writing your own codes. Controls and animation are a really big topic, and if anyone's seen my Symphony of the Night Mega Drive game, you can see how complex the Alucard animation and control code is there. So in the future, I'll definitely do more lessons on animation and controls and how to do them, but this is a basic series after all, so I want to stick to the basics and give everyone that, so I don't want to get too deep into any one topic. So next lesson, we're going to learn how to play music on the Mega Drive. Now, if you thought the last two lessons were quite difficult and quite meaty, thankfully the next lesson is going to be relatively easy in comparison, so it'll be easier for me to create the lesson, it'll be easier for you to study it. So please stick around for that, for the next lesson on music, on how to play it on your Mega Drive. That's it for this lesson. Thank you so much for watching. If you're interested in this kind of content, then please subscribe to the channel.
I'm interested in this.
And if you want to support the channel further, I have a Patreon account.
You won't go unrewarded.
And until next time,
farewell.